I love how you can see my work in progress puzzle every time I film, or in a lot of videos you can see my puzzling. This is also the puzzle table, as well as our dining table. Anyway, today's puzzle is the moon. I'm doing a moon one. Today's video, we're going to be talking about the Fear Street trilogy that was just posted this month of July. That includes Fear Street 1994, 1978, and 1666. I will be ranking them, even though there's only 3, and reviewing each one. So let's get to it. So the series was actually announced years ago and went into development in 2015. So this has been in the works for quite a while. And they wrapped filming all 3 back in 2019. It was originally supposed to be a theatrical released in 2020, but of course the pandemic happened, so then they sold the rights to Netflix and we got it in 2021. I think releasing them over a span of 3 consecutive weeks to Netflix was such a smart idea because it allowed people to really build hype for the series, and we got 3 full-length movies out of it. And putting it to Netflix I think was a smart choice as well versus a theatrical release. I think the Netflix option was a little bit more successful than maybe a theatrical release would have been. Of course, this is based on the book series Fear Street by RL Stine, which I kind of see as, I interpret it more as for teenagers versus Goosebumps, Goosebumps, which is a little bit more geared towards children. I kind of talk about general spoilers in this video, so hopefully you've seen them all, just, you know, to be safe. I am going to try to be careful. When I get to 1666, there might be some spoilers in there, but very, very minor. I'm not going to talk about anything major that happened, so just be warned. There might be little things that I say that could spoil it, but nothing like big. Also, I want to give a quick disclaimer before we get to my reviews that these movies are very well loved by fans and critics. They received very positive reception, so I just want to remind you that this is just my personal opinion and my thoughts and reviews of these movies. It does not impact you or your enjoyment of the series. I just want to throw that out there. So we're gonna go through my general thoughts of all the movies in order, and then I will be doing the ranking in the end. So first up, let's talk about 1994. 1994 follows a group of teenage friends living in Shadyside who accidentally discovered the ancient evil causing a series of brutal murders and the curse on their town for over 300 years. 1994 hands down had the best nostalgia for me as someone who grew up in the 90s. I mean, I was born in 1990, so it was very reminiscent of my childhood. The soundtrack was perfection. I absolutely loved it, was obsessed with it from the second it started, although I will forgive it for some of the songs in the soundtrack not being released in 1994. They came out later in the 90s, but we'll give it a pass. I felt that 94 was just okay, like just okay. It was enjoyable, it was entertaining, but it had a lot of flaws in my opinion, and it didn't really impress me and get me super excited for the rest of the series. I thought it started off okay. It wasn't the strongest point by any means. It ended great. The ending of this was phenomenal, and I absolutely loved the gore. I was not expecting it to be that gory. The biggest issue I had with 1994 was the pacing, because it really fell flat for me towards the middle. Like the whole middle chunk, I feel, of this movie was just flat, and all of the deaths and body counts seemed to happen towards the end. So for me, that was kind of a letdown. I wish they would have dispersed some of the action throughout. Like I said, it started off okay. It did hook me in, you know, with the gore in the beginning, but it didn't maintain that throughout. So I just felt personally that the pacing was just not great. I was also thrown off by the seemingly random sex scene in the middle of the movie. I'm not a prude by any means, but I mean, I've been honest before that sex and horror is not my favorite thing. I don't feel like it's absolutely necessary, hence why a lot of my favorite movies are PG-13 movies. For me, this one felt out of place. I felt like in the other ones, it wasn't really out of place. In the Fear Street series, it wasn't out of place. This one felt very disjointed and kind of random because there was 3 different, like, scenes going on all at the same time, and it really broke the tension. Any tension that they were building in the middle of the movie, which was not a lot, really broke for me when that happened. So I was not really a fan of that. I don't know if this is a controversial opinion, but I honestly wasn't a huge fan of some of the acting. I felt like the lead wasn't that strong. I don't know if I'm in the minority here. I've talked to some people and they kind of agree, so I don't know, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. I wasn't a huge fan of the lead. in this one and 1666. Was not a huge fan. Personally, I just could tell a lot of the scenes when she was acting and she was just like trying too hard, in my opinion. So that's just my thoughts. The killer in 1994 was actually based on a character in RL Stine's books, but I don't feel like it was that interesting. Obviously, we get the origin story and everything and the backstory as the series goes on. However, I don't feel like the killer in the first part in 1994 was that strong. It's probably my least favorite in the whole series. I did enjoy the subtle references to Scream and just horror in general throughout the series. It kind of did feel like a love letter to horror in many ways. So I enjoyed those aspects, especially because Scream is such a famous movie from the 90s. So it felt appropriate. And overall, I felt that 94 was entertaining. It's not my favorite. It did impress me with the end. I just wish it didn't take up until the end to impress me or to get to a really good place. I felt like it needed some more tension and action going on throughout the whole movie. Moving on to part 2, 1978. This follows a group of teenage campers at Camp Nightwing when another shady sider gets possessed with the urge to kill. Even though this takes place in 1978, this definitely feels like Friday the 13th movie, and I feel like there was a lot of homages to that in this movie, especially because the location where they filmed Camp Nightwing was actually a location where they filmed Jason Lives. So I feel like there was a lot of references to that. Also, the names used in the movie, Alice and Tommy, are references to Friday the 13th. And I think because the references were kind of so on the nose, a lot of people would see this movie as kind of a ripoff of Friday the 13th. I saw it more as an homage, and it didn't bother me, honestly. I didn't see it as a blatant ripoff because of the backstory of Shady Side and how the killers are created and everything like that. It felt different enough for me to where I could separate it from Friday the 13th, but still appreciate all of the homages that were put into it. Also, it gets a little weird towards the end, you know, with like the beating fleshy bits. Like, that was interesting to me and I loved that part. That's probably one of the best and strongest scenes in the whole series, in my opinion. And I think you all can probably guess that I'm a little bit biased towards this one in particular because it is set in a camp. Anything revolving around nature and camping and a horror movie, especially involving teens, it's probably gonna be a strong one in my opinion, just with that alone. I actually love the references. This has my favorite references by far, especially to Stephen King, because Carrie had just been released, the movie and the book, and I like the references to him because he was a newbie in horror at the time when this movie took place, so I really enjoyed those references. Obviously, I'm wearing my Carrie shirt to honor that. So despite 1978 being the second part in the series, to me it was the most effective in feeling like its own part, if that makes sense. It feels like its own movie and it could be kind of a standalone movie. Obviously, there's still some more development that we need in the end, so we have to watch the third part, but I do feel like overall it's the most effective in feeling kind of independent. Also, I think the pacing was the best in the trilogy. I think this had the tension gaining momentum as it properly should in the horror genre and kept it up. I feel like towards the end it was really effective in maintaining momentum and the pacing and everything like that. I don't think it was a perfect movie by any means. I think one of the downfalls for all three is that the time periods, although the references were good, I feel like they were almost a modern depiction of the time periods, and that goes for the whole trilogy, including this one. Especially 1666 kind of felt like a modern take on the Pilgrim era or whatever, but they didn't necessarily feel like they 100% fit in the era that they were meant to take place in. I almost wish that 78 went a little bit more campy like they did in the 80s, 70s and 80s slasher movies. You know, I appreciate that they did a more serious tone to fit the rest of the trilogy, but it almost took itself a little too seriously, and it would have been really fun to see them push the real campy side of it. Also, Sadie Sink as Ziggy is my favorite acting and character in the whole series. So let's talk about part 3, 1666. This is where it might get a little bit spoilery because obviously it is the finale and the last part, so there's going to be more plot points and things in this So just a heads up, might get a little spoilery. So of course, this is also 1994 Part 2, which I'm not gonna lie, threw me off a little bit. I was most excited for 1666, and it is the shortest era that we spend the least amount of time in. So 1666 shows us the origin of Serafir's curse as Shadyside history comes full circle. Now, my opinion about this is going to be a little controversial, I guess. I don't know why, but it seems like this one is the most well-loved in the whole trilogy. And I don't get it. When I saw the preview at the end of 78 for 66, I was like, oh, so it's just their take on A24's The Witch. Like, it looked almost like a ripoff, which maybe that's just what the movie is homaging to. But, you know, like the first one we got Scream, the second one we got Friday, the 13th, and this one we have The Witch, maybe. But for me, it was almost a ripoff. So maybe it's my fault that I'm comparing it to something like that, because obviously it's not gonna compare to The Witch. It's not going to live up to that potential, obviously, so that's my bad. Regardless if it ended up being as good as The Witch or anything like that, I'm gonna try not to like talk about The Witch too much or like compare it too much, but I figured it was going to be one of my, I thought it was gonna be my favorite, to be honest, because I love a good period piece and I like that era, and I enjoyed The Witch, obviously, so I was, you know, excited for 1666. I just knew that was gonna be my favorite. I was wrong. I will say that 1666, or Part 3, was the most exciting part to watch because of the pacing. It has to be pretty quick because we're going through two different eras, with the first part being 1666 and then the second part being 1994 Part 2. So there's a lot to go on in the final part of this series. I have to say that I kind of wish that we did get a different actor for Serafir. It kind of threw me off that we have Dina being possessed by Serafir, so then she portrays Sarah in Part 3. I wish we had the character, like a different character or something playing her, because obviously I'm not a huge fan of 94, and we're just like it just felt so similar. I mean, obviously 1666 used a lot of the same actors as the previous parts because they're all like in her world, so they're represented in Serafir's world by them. Like, we could have gotten an explanation that she's experiencing a flashback and she's, you know, being kind of possessed, if you will, by Serafir to show her the history. We only needed one scene to really explain that, and then we just go back in time and see a completely different group of people playing the story out, like we did with 78. It was all new people. I wish we had that going on instead of like the same actors from 94 coming back. Also, I'm not gonna lie that the modernization of 1666 really took me out of it, because when you compare it to something like The Witch, which is a little bit more historically accurate, I just don't think Part 3 is accurate to the times. Like, I don't think the preacher's daughter would be out in the woods doing drugs. I don't know. It just felt a little bit too modern when they were all like partying, and the language that they were using was just very modern. So it really took me out of the time period, and I just wish it was a little bit more historically accurate. It doesn't have to go full on witch language, because that you kind of need subtitles for, but it just a little bit, you know, and the accents weren't great either in 1666, sorry. However, I did really enjoy 1994 Part 2, actually. I thought that was a great finale to the end of the movie, and was definitely the best part in Part 3, which surprised me because I thought I was really gonna like the first part the most. I love that we returned to the mall, so it's like full circle, you know, from Part 1. And we got to see all the killers over the years, which was the most interesting part, I think, to me, of the whole series. I wanted to see some of these other ones and their backstories. Like, what's up with the guy with like the weird mask? Like, it looked so cool. So I was left wanting more, even though we got to see like 5 killers, I don't know how many, but we got to see a variety. They all kind of felt similar though. You know, I wish we got to see some of the weird ones. Okay, let's get to my rankings of these 3 parts. I bet you can guess what my rankings will be based on my reviews of them. Let's start with the worst one, in my opinion. 1994. I probably enjoyed this one the least, and would be the one that I'd be least excited to rewatch if I ever were to rewatch it. I just kind of felt like 94 was just okay. It was like average. Then we have in second place 1666. A lot of things disappointed me about this part, I'm not gonna lie, but I found it to be better executed as a story and just more effective as a movie. And then finally in first place for me, which is hands down my favorite, after I watched it I was like, that's gonna be a tough one to beat. I don't know if 1666 can beat it. 1978. Obviously. I would absolutely rewatch this one again and again. I think it was so well done. The acting was incredible. It hands down had the best acting in the whole series. Like, I don't know if you can argue that. It may become a new favorite teen horror movie for me. It kind of sucks that the story is kind of incomplete towards the end because you have to watch part 3. So it can't really stand alone and on its own, but I do really enjoy it as a teen horror movie and would definitely revisit this. So final thoughts. I wasn't sure how to really approach this video because unlike everyone else, I'm not obsessed with this trilogy, and I was honestly kind of surprised and like thought something was wrong with me because I wasn't pumped about it. I was excited about it. I was anticipating it years ago when it was announced, like in 2019, that it was going to be released, and I had even talked about it way back in the day. But once I saw them, I didn't get it. Like, I didn't understand the hype really. They're fine. They're fine movies, honestly. You know, 3 stars. They're okay. But I just wasn't sure why I didn't see them as amazing, perfect movies like everyone else was talking about them. Like, when I saw people talking about them, how they're gonna revolutionize the genre and all this kind of stuff, I was like, really? I mean, they were cool. They were gory. That's fun. They're teen movies. I love teen movies. But that's about it. You know, I enjoyed watching them every week. They're enjoyable movies. I would definitely recommend them, but don't go into them thinking they're going to be these phenomenal 5-star films because they're not. And I was a little confused by all the critics loving 1666 so much. Like, am I missing something? Are people getting something out of it that I'm not? Because I feel a little bit of FOMO, honestly. I see people raving about these movies and I'm like, oh. Well, I wish I felt like that. I want something like that in the horror genre right now. So let me know if I'm alone in that and feeling a little bit confused by the reception of these movies. They're fine, but revolutionary, they are not. But anyway, I would love to hear your thoughts on all of these movies and your individual rankings down in the comments. I hope you enjoyed, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.